Hi everyone, a very good day to you. It's 3 o'clock in here in France. I'll give it 2 more minutes for people to sign up and we can start the webinar. Thank you so much. I can see we have 55 people. I'll give it 1 more minute and then we can start. Thank you. Okay, I think we can go for it because then we always have trouble at the end when questions come up. So again, a very good day to you. My name is Ignacio Gavilan. I've been leading environmental sustainability for the Consumer Goods Forum for the past few years. Among the topics that I have under my responsibilities, plastics, plastic waste, and the coalition. So I'm aware that some of you are not too familiar with the Consumer Goods Forum. So let me give you a quick word about the organization. This is a CEO-led organization that basically helps the world's retailers and manufacturers to collaborate alongside key stakeholders to basically secure consumer trust and drive positive change, including greater efficiency within their own operations. With our global reach, the good thing is having this CEO leadership and focus. We're in a unique position to drive positive change and help address key challenges impacting the industry overall, such as human rights, health and wellness, food safety, product data, and of course, plastics. We would like to pride ourselves of being a do tank and our ability to produce a range of toolkits, of guidelines, manuals, case study booklets to help members implement commitments on these difficult topics. And particularly on plastic, we created a coalition of action. In 2020, our strategy to help accelerate this collective impact of our members became very much focused on the creation, the drive, and the commitment of our coalitions of action. So these are they have been developed to change our ways of working and improve the implementation and governance models. They didn't change the topics. We continue to stick to the ones I mentioned: deforestation, plastic, food waste, health, food safety, sustainable supply chains, forced labor. They're focused in one topic. They give more freedom to invest to the companies in the coalition, and they have explicit company commitments. So the Coalition of Plastic was actually created a few days before we were all forced to work remotely. So March 2020, it has now 2 years and 40 members and a good split between retailers and manufacturers. So what's at stake in here and why are we coming together as the packaged consumer goods industry? So I think all of you in the audience will agree with me that we have a problem with plastic waste. We in the FMCG sector are in a very powerful position to deliver very impactful industry-led solutions to help ensure that plastic doesn't end up in nature as it is the case today. But for that, we need collaborative action. And this coalition is in a formidable position to help drive positive change on the plastic challenge and towards a more circular economy. So as a coalition, we have developed a strategy that supports our objectives of collaboration and circularity, inspired by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation New Plastics Economy Global Commitment. And these goals are embodied in our central aim for members to take action on, number one, the design and use of plastic packaging, the development of waste management systems, and the introduction of recycling innovations that can support, hopefully, greater efficiency in recycling efforts. So in essence, what we want is less and better plastic and a much better system for collection, sorting, and recycling. So we're committed to a number of things as a coalition. Number one, as I mentioned, is implementing a very small number of impactful golden design rules on packaging design, 9 of them. You have them available on the web. Second one is aligning on principles for optimal extended producer responsibility schemes, which will ultimately help individual member companies with their government engagement approaches in the different geographies where they operate. And 3, engaging with stakeholders to ensure broad support for advanced chemical recycling, sending a very strong demand signal to the upstream suppliers. That brings me to the topic, why chemical recycling? Because we believe it's the only currently available technology to recycle flexible plastic waste into new packaging with food grade quality. So with chemical recycling, the CGF members aim to increase overall plastic recycling rate, which could enable the company's recyclability targets to be met. And what we've done so far is basically publish an independent life cycle analysis to demonstrate that chemical recycling of hard to recycle plastic could reduce the climate impact. And secondly, 16 members within the coalition have also co-authored a paper which outlines a set of principles for credible, safe, and environmentally sound chemical recycling industry. So I'll stop there with the introduction. Today, we have an incredible panel with us. We're very lucky to have the 2 co-leads of the chemical recycling group, together with 2 very important organizations on the sector. So the 2 co-leads of the coalition are Anke Hampel, Global Innovation and Sustainability Director for Tetra Pak, and Colin Kell with Unilever, Home Beauty and Personal Care Packaging Director. And then we have from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the lead of the New Plastics Economy Initiative, Sander, and then Janek, who is Climate, Energy and Air Pollution Program Coordinator with Zero Waste Europe. So welcome all of you, and thank you very much for being with us. So let me start with you, Colin. Why let's frame it a little bit. Why chemical recycling is such an important pre-competitive topic for the CGF members?
Yeah, I think, as you say, Ignacio, this is an area where there's a group which has really been looking to see what's possible here. We see chemical recycling as very much an emerging technology space. It's one which, as you've said, in principle, we could see as being an extremely relevant technology to be able to support the opportunities to be able to improve recycling rates around flexibles and so on. However, the reality is at the moment that very different approaches are being taken by different technology developers across the value chain. And so as an FMCG group and as the CGF group, we really felt that it was extremely important to be able to come together and create a consistent point of view in terms of what are the criteria that under which we would regard this technology or the outputs of this technology as being acceptable for us, being the ultimate users of these materials in the type of products which we're putting onto the marketplace. And so that has been sort of at the heart of why we've been bringing people together to have these conversations, to try and make sure we can come to a common perspective on many of these issues. And as a result of that, indeed, as you say, we've recently published this vision and principles document with all the associated criteria and supporting information, which is very much trying to give a common perspective as a group to say, what are the sort of criteria, what are the sort of principles which we would all collectively sign up to as being necessary in order that the output of this technology can actually be something that we would be comfortable to utilize as part of our delivery against our commitments. So very much this early stage, very much pre-competitive conversations, but very much about common principles to a point where we'd all have a common perspective on when and how this approach can fit into the overall picture of how one deals with these challenges on plastics.
Okay, super. Thank you so much, Colin. So, Sandro, let me continue with you. You guys are the champions of circular economy. How does chemical recycling fit into this broader vision for plastic packaging and circular economy?
Yeah, I basically have three fairly short key messages around this, and the first one is that we will not recycle our way out of plastic waste and pollution. I think that's just important to keep in mind. It's a pipe dream to think that we can continue to produce ever more plastic waste and assume that with better recycling we can just recycle all of that. If we go for that trajectory, then we'll be playing catch up for many decades to come. So it's really crucial that we all first and foremost eliminate and innovate to avoid generating plastic waste in the first place, and that includes the many efforts we are seeing on um, lightweighting and removing excess packaging, but it goes far beyond that. It's a very big innovation opportunity to innovate packaging, innovate the products inside them, and innovate the business models around it. And just to illustrate how unexplored this opportunity is, I just like to um, uh, trigger the question with all the businesses in the room of how many of you can genuinely say that your organization has a very clear reuse strategy with clear ambitions and action plans. The second key message is recycling as long as it's recycling. And what I mean with that is we have a very wide range of recycling technologies. Many people often talk about mechanical and chemical, but actually the word chemical recycling is in and of itself a very broad umbrella term with a very wide range of technologies, from dissolution to depolymerization to pyrolysis, gasification, etc. They're all very different in terms of technology, the type of materials, the yields, the economics, energy use, everything. Um, so recycling is recycling. We want materials to be circulated in the economy at their highest value at all point in time. But how you do that, we're in principle technology neutral. I say in principle because then, of course, in practice, we then do need to look at what's the energy use, what's the emissions, what's the toxicity impact, what's the yields we're going to get with this, etc. And we know mechanical recycling and the many different chemical recycling technologies all score very different according to these different criteria. The second part of that sentence was saying, as long as it is recycling. And here I think recycling is very clearly defined by ISO definitions of turning materials back into new materials, being very explicit about excluding turning materials into energy, into fuels. And the reason I stress that in this context is that for some chemical recycling technologies, I'm thinking about pyrolysis, gasification, the exact same technology, even the exact same facility, or even the exact same output of that facility could go a circular pathway if it's used to produce new materials, but could equally be sold to a shipping company to use as fuel to power their ships. So it's very important we keep drawing that clear line between what's circular, what's not circular, what's recycling, what's not recycling, and not try to claim plastics to fuel activities as being recycling. And then the third key message that, as Colin also referred to, that there's still a lot of questions to be solved around that, and that's why it's important to do those efforts around what are the boundary conditions, what to make this fit into a broader circular economy solution. There's questions around yields, in particular for the type of pyrolysis and gasification technologies, but equally, it's not just about the technology itself and the recycling itself. There's bigger challenges about how do we, flexibles was mentioned, for example, but how do we get these collected in the first place and sorted in the first place to even get them to any type of recycling facility, and all of that will be really hard. Plus, the outcome at the end might have very low yield, so it does, there are some serious questions about um, how this fits in a much broader solution to solve things like flexible packaging or other packaging waste.
Excellent, thank you. Very clear, very concise. Thank you so much. I think we will get back to you later on. I forgot to mention to the audience, if you have questions, you could put them in the chat and they will come to us as you type them. So it's good that you start thinking about the question. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end. So thank you, Sandro, very much for your input. So Zero Waste Europe. You guys have been very helpful and on top of this agenda. And you publish a number of papers and you've been very active. What are the principles that your organization has put together to ensure that this chemical recycling industry develops in a safe and credible way?
Yeah, thanks first of all for the invitation, and it's really great to be able to present our principles paper. In fact, we have indeed just developed a paper which outlines principles for chemical recycling and circularity of plastics in general. It's a joint paper together with ECOS and Environmental Action Germany, which is also known as Deutsche Umwelthilfe. And the paper, we have also consulted with our NGOs who form part of our wider network. And the aim was to define the civil society position towards chemical recycling. Obviously, for the reasons that it's talked a lot and it's very technical, and it's to kind of have a common approach to chemical recycling. Officially, we will be launching it next week, and we also encourage other organizations to support this by signing the pledge. So when it comes to the principles, first of all, we believe that products should be designed by taking into account the full life cycle of the products, meaning it will enable the material reduction, reuse, and mechanical recyclability. And in that perspective, chemical recycling should not be used as an excuse to do so, because I think it's we know very clearly that there's a lot of products which are very hard to recycle mechanically and also so in chemically. So I think the first has to be the reduction and reuse. In practice, this means that we have to focus on reduction of plastics and development of solutions such as reuse, refill, and repair practices, particularly with new products design, which considers all stages of life from feedstock to end of life treatment. Secondly, we taking into account the environmental impact assessments, we recommend putting chemical recycling below mechanical recycling in the waste hierarchy, and that it should focus mainly on durable plastic waste that cannot be mechanically recycled. And in practice, it means that we should be ranking technologies based on the environmental impacts, where mechanical recycling, therefore, is still a preferred option. Thirdly, it's also important that when in the production, virgin plastics is mixed, for example, with output of from chemical recycling, then it should contain a very verifiable amount of recycled content, and we recommend using controlled blending chain of custody model, which allows the actual traceability of recycled content in final products, which means in practice that products that are labeled as recycled or of containing a specific amount of recycled plastics shall actually contain the indicated amount of recycled content, and consumers shall be able to verify this. So this is important. And in order to be classified as chemical recycling, we also believe that the conversion rate of carbon should be at least 40% into new products, which means that in practice that a process should keep at least 80% of the carbon content of plastic waste until the transformation into new products in order to be qualified as recycling. And if not, then it should be considered as recovery. We also have two other principles which mainly relate to the impact. We believe that citizens have the right to enjoy living in a toxic-free environment. Therefore, we need to ensure that chemical recycling technologies should deliver safe, non-toxic and decontaminated products and byproducts and waste. And what it means in practice is that we need to have monitoring to ensure toxic-free products in line with the EU legislation requirements for chemicals. And finally, following the principles of social, economic, and environmental justice, the development of chemical recycling facilities should not come at the expense of the surrounding environment and communities. Therefore, in practice, what it means is that when developing those facilities, there should be a comprehensive system to help monitor pollutants to ensure environmental and health protection. So I'll finish here and thank you, and looking forward to the questions and debate.
Super, thank you, Janek. Very clear. So Anke, let's bring it back home. I mentioned the CGF vision and principles before for chemical recycling. So maybe it's good that you share with the audience what do they mean in essence, and what are the risks and opportunities that members are seeing on this topic.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ignacio, first of all, and also to the team here. Very insightful, and yeah, very much enjoying these discussions. And big thanks also to my predecessor, Lisa Rieden, who has been part of creating this vision and principle paper for the work stream on chemical recycling. The principles that had been laid out here are based first on the importance of chemical recycling in a circular economy for plastics, and it should be operated, and I think here we are getting close to what Janek just shared. It should be operated under credible, ethical, safe, and environmentally sound conditions. So I think very much, especially to your last point there, Janek, that's very much in line with what you said. If we come to the 4 principles that had been laid out by the work stream here, we're talking about increasing the availability, and it's important that this happens at not at the expense of economically viable mechanical recycling. And this means really in practice and at scale as laid out by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So that's an important principle, and I think we will keep coming back to this. This is complementary, and anything that in the future, as we started discussing, we will not be talking waste so much, we will be talking resources. And so if there's an efficient way mechanically recycling the resources that will be available for a circular economy, we should give it the preference it needs. The second principle is that the content obviously needs to be traceable. And there the mass balance protocol, Janek, you called it chain of custody, principles are very much aligned with this principle. So we really think this is important. Otherwise, there is a risk, obviously, of greenwashing, and we do not want to enter this space at all. And maybe I can also mention the team has been working very heavily also on claims guidelines to really make sure we're not entering any space there that we cannot represent together. The third principle is that the other recycled output actually should be deprioritized. And here we are talking about asphalt and bitumen. It's important that when we focus on the recycling, really the plastics output is maximized. At the same time, and this fits nicely, Janek, with what you said as well, the fuel part that could be produced from these assets, and I think Sander said it, should be really minimized. And here we come back to the yield question, and also to the credible accounting, which actually brings me to the fourth principle, which means we need to have a life cycle assessment, and the impact of it should focus really on climate and on credibility that is demonstrating that the equivalent or lower emissions are there versus fossil-based materials, virgin materials, obviously, in a comparable system. And there we had a lot of discussion, obviously, before the LCA document was published. So very important principle as well. In terms of the vision, we do want, as a work stream, to hit these recycling rates and the recyclability targets that are set out. And this is really something that will be enabled by enabling chemical recycling to work for flexible packaging, as we heard, but also other hard to recycle plastics at scale. So that's the opportunity we see there. At the same time, we see that food grade recycled plastics are something that we will not be able to meet with mechanically recycled materials. At least this is the state of the technology and the innovation today. So we do think we will need chemical recycling for food applications to meet the targets that are being set out and will be set out by companies and also governments or regional administrations. That's it from my end. So I think some risk and opportunities you heard already, and I think we will come back to these in the Q&A part.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anke. And thank you everyone for the first intervention. I have a few questions for you, but I think we have some interesting ones on the chat. Let me start with one that is addressed to Sander. Actually, acknowledging that prevention is always better than recycling, why is it impossible to recycle your way out of the problem?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and there's both a theoretical and a very practical argument. I mean, the first theoretical argument, and the words yield and losses, etc., already came up, right? So the recycling system just inherently has a lot of losses, being it in the collection step, in the sorting step, in the recycling step, especially the pyrolysis type of technologies. We refer to yields of even below 50%, and that's even without taking into account the losses in collecting and sorting it in the first place. So there's that as a, like, say, kind of just purely theoretically already, like every waste that is not generated is waste that doesn't go through a process with many kind of losses, and is therefore better, and that's kind of how the waste hierarchy comes in, etc. There's a second element which is also more practical, is just if we look at very practically the world we live in today, and how many, I think that the Breaking the Plastic Wave study was has quantified some of that in a very nice way, but how long it will simply take to build collection, sorting, recycling infrastructure all across the world, we're talking decades. So any waste we can eliminate in the first place, or avoid generating waste in the first place, is the shortest way to stop leakage, or reduce, at least reduce leakage. That's not to say that the end point is go to zero packaging altogether or zero plastics altogether. I don't think that's the end game, but at least we live in a reality where, for unfortunately many years to come, there will be a lot of leakage. So every waste we don't generate is good. So if we can eliminate over packaging, that's just 100% elimination of waste. But even with reuse, even if you reuse things once, that's 50% of waste can be eliminated. If you reuse it 10 times, it's 90% reduction. So it can go really fast. So wherever that is possible, and again, it's not possible everywhere, but wherever that's possible, that should be preferred. And then finally, again, the Breaking Plastic Wave quantified some of that, but there's benefits in terms of emissions if you compare the more comprehensive circular scenario, which had and recycling and reduction and reuse, versus a scenario going for recycling only, had economic benefits, leakage reduction benefits, emission benefits. So that is why.
Thank you, Sander. Very good response to a difficult question, actually. There's another question here, a bit contentious, but any of you can pick it up, one or two if you want. We should stop comparing technologies with each other and placing them in a hierarchy. They should be selected considering the product wasted and check which technology fits best. They are all needed and complementary to solve the waste issue. So basically a hierarchy of technologies in here. I'm assuming it's for chemical recycling. Any thoughts on that? Janek, you're laughing.
I'm happy to throw in some thoughts. I mean, knowing I've just spoken, so I'm also happy for other people to pick it up. But I guess it's good to compare technologies. Like what I said, in principle we're technology neutral, but we do need to look at the yields, the emissions, the energy use, the economics, all of that. I guess putting it in a hierarchy, I think still is valuable, because we don't want to go into a mindset of the waste is what it is, and then we fit it with the best technology, as if the waste we generate is like a static thing, because we have a lot of ways to impact the waste we generate, like reducing that waste, but also redesigning it so we actually have completely different types of waste. So it's good to have something to aim for, like aim to go higher on the ladder from the design phase. Can you make a perfect hierarchy of all these technologies? Probably not, but some, and again, chemical recycling is an umbrella with many different technologies. I don't think it's probably helpful to try and make a hierarchy between all of these. But having that aspiration to go as high as possible on that ladder, and as I said, start with reducing where we can, etc., is helpful, because we cannot see the waste we generate as just a fact that we can't change.
Yeah,
Super.
if you may, yeah. Can I?
Janek and then Colin. Thank you.
Okay. Just yeah. I just would like to add. I agree. I think technically everything can be recycled if you wanted to. It all depends on amount of energy and resources you put into it. So the question is, what is the best environmental outcome? And that's what the waste hierarchy aims to do. It actually ranks the different activities according to the environmental impacts. And this is why we suggest that some of those very energy intensive recycling should be labeled as below. So yeah, I think it does make sense to differentiate between different technologies according to the environmental impacts. You can actually turn, if you wanted to, you can turn waste into diamonds, but yeah, how much energy would that take?
Good, thank you. Colin, you had a comment?
Yes, I was just going to build on both Sander and Janek's comments. Indeed, I think it's clearly a situation where there are many different complementary activities that all need to be somehow managed together. I think there is indeed a clear drive to make sure that the feedstocks, the waste feedstocks that are around, we are making those interventions right up front at the design stage, as has been commented by a number of people already, to make them as viable as possible for, let's call it, the highest level of whether it's reuse or suitable elimination or whatever. But there is no doubt that there is a place in that overall suite of technologies for that you need to use in order to be able to treat different materials in the best possible way. And where there is a role for chemical recycling in that is certainly where there are technical or other drivers that lead you to a place where you may need to use certain types of packaging material solutions, which are at this stage not viable to be able to be handled in a recycling context via mechanical. There should always be a driver to try and make those materials suitable for mechanical recycling, as within that hierarchy of recycling technologies, and there may be other elements within that overall hierarchy. But certainly we should make sure that we are clear that when it is most appropriate for chemical recycling to have a role to play, what materials are best suited there in order to avoid them ending up further down the waste hierarchy, in other words, into landfill or into incineration, etc. So there is a role for the technology, and it has to be offset against what you do in terms of design, what you do in terms of the management of material waste and feedstocks, in order to make sure that you do target the right materials for the right end of life.
Thank you all for the comments. Now, let me turn probably Anke and you, Colin. There's a number of, we have now 100 participants in the call. So I'm assuming there's a number of small, medium companies looking at this topic. What would be your advice coming from two large corporations for individual organizations trying to navigate this chemical recycling space when it's already complicated to redesign the product portfolio? They're trying to start working on EPR and making sense of the fees. Now here we go with the chemical recycling space. If I'm a small, medium company, let's say in Europe or the United States, how do I navigate all of these?
Yeah, so maybe I can start, Anke, and then please build on my comments. So I think there is a starting point, which is definitely looking at the design of the solution itself, the relevant packaging solution, the packaging system, which you're looking to bring to the market. But having done so, if through the conversations we were having before about how one reaches through a hierarchy, a point that says, can these materials ideally be part of a reuse system? Can they be something which could be handled in a mechanical recycling process? If you reach a stage in the trade-offs and the discussions in terms of that design solution, that means that you see chemical recycling as potential end of life. And more particularly in the context of perhaps a company thinking about looking into this space, it'll be more about utilizing materials that have come from that sort of process. Then absolutely, one should think at the very beginning about making sure you understand what exactly is the background to those materials. So understand, and be asking important questions back to the suppliers of these materials that you're potentially engaging with, to understand the feedstock, to understand and make sure that the materials that have been utilized as feedstock are not materials which should have gone to mechanical recycling, for example, that there is indeed a viable life cycle assessment which gives confidence around the credibility of the system, that the yields are through the process that the particular converter is using, have been focused on trying to maximize plastic relevant outputs, and of course that there is an end-to-end certification in place around that. So I think all of these things are important questions that are essentially sort of the principles that we've sort of laid out. And I think it's important for somebody who's thinking about accessing and utilizing such materials, recognizing the role that the material might have in terms of being available as a potential food grade recycled plastic content to add to a particular product, that you're confident that actually all of those types of criteria are being met. Because if not, then it's a material space that you should be questioning rather than just accepting without any sort of interrogation. Anke, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Maybe an important additional part is really communication. And I think you alluded to this, to the internal evaluation first on how does this fit in what I'm trying to deliver. And Sander said it very clearly. We first need to look at how can I reduce plastics? How can I eliminate it? Is there any reuse opportunity? And when you went through all these and you're very clear, then it's also easier to communicate. And I think it's very much about internal and external stakeholder management as always. For the people who have been looking into it very closely, it's very obvious the feedstock is put back into its monomer status if you think about the pyrolysis process. And hence, if you think about your bill of materials, it's a material that is already there, you're replacing it, and then you have to think about how am I actually going to do the traceability, which we had laid out as one of the principles, in a justifiable, credible way. Which means you next have to look at your chain of custody certification, explain what mass balance means in a credible way to the consumer and customer. It's not meaningful to a lot of people yet. So you need to use the certification body, you need to use the mass balance concept, find credible claims, make sure that, as Colin said, you also can communicate on a credible life cycle assessment. And then, of course, keep monitoring your provider and your value chain, because things are evolving. We are looking here at the fast evolving technology. We only have a few assets that are starting to be economically viable. And there might be very clean waste streams going in today, and they are designed to handle hard to recycle materials that are not going to work for mechanical recycling, as we said before. But of course, you have to have some understanding of this and keep monitoring what's happening and what investments are there. And then last but not least, you also have to manage the premium that comes along with the material. We are seeing a huge premium and availability issue in the market right now. So once you have managed your communication with the customer, you might not have the material available. So we have been going through several loops of this, of working with the customer to understand where it makes sense in the portfolio to introduce this recycled content as an early mover, as an early stage, because we do want to demonstrate the technology is viable in the right application. But then you might not have availability from the material. And then on top, you have to manage your way as you scale it up, how you manage it through your system and make sure that it stays credible.
Super. Thank you both. Questions keep coming, which is good. There's another interesting one. Let's move to policy now. So there's a question from the audience. They will welcome thoughts from any of you on how to best regulate chemical recycling technologies. Any of you wants to volunteer? Trying to read your faces here.
Obviously, I don't have all the answers on this, but I guess one important thing that already was mentioned just now by Anke was the mass balance, and I think there's still a lot of different opinions, clarity on how that should look like, how that should work in a credible way. I also within the industry see very different perspectives on that, all the way from the many conversations I had about that, somewhere the one extreme of the spectrum where I started to feel very uncomfortable of like, is this business trying to design it in a way with as many possible loopholes so that they can make the best claims, even if it doesn't solve the problem, and companies at the entire other end of the spectrum who said, I don't want mass balance at all. I only want to use kind of recycled plastics that's literally the same molecules as what went into the plant and no kind of chain of custody systems in between. And of course, the biggest group of companies somewhere in between on that spectrum, where I think also I am, where it's for me, it's not about mass balance, yes or no, but about how to make it work in a credible way. So that's clearly a big policy gap that will be required to give that that transparency and credibility. And I think the other thing is, no matter how basic it might sound, but what I said at the beginning of like drawing that clear boundary between what is recycling, what's not recycling, still see lobbying efforts to try and claim recycling for plastic, for things that are actually plastics to fuel, plastics to energy, or even within pyrolysis and these technologies, if only X% actually is recycled, and we know the percentages of yield are very low, then at the very best, those percentages can be kind of claimed to be recycled, but all the rest, the 70-60% yield losses, they should not be claimed to be recycled, right? So it sounds very basic question on what is recycling, what's not, but even that is still in policy in many cases not very clearly defined.
Ignacio, I could maybe take an approach here. For me, there are two important things, and we alluded to it earlier. We have to also think about what solutions are there to reduce emissions, correct? We said in our principles, we have to focus on the climate impact. And in my mind, policy should also cater for what we call renewable polymers plastics. There are different terms around. There is a definition of sustainable plastics, which I know can be concerning. But in the end, basically, there are solutions that have bio-based feedstock. There are solutions that have recycled feedstock. All play a role in this. And in the end, you need to look at how can you really reduce the emissions, which is our immediate need when you think about the climate crisis. So that's an important consideration for me in terms of policy, that this should be considered as well, and that we're not taking the full shift to recycled only. And then we have a challenge because availability will continue being a challenge we are not seeing the investments ramping up as fast as we need. And who has seen the latest McKinsey study on this topic, we see a huge gap there on the demand that is out there and that we are seeing also in the consumer goods forum workstream and what actually is going to come on stream. So that's an important part to also consider bio-based feedstock in this whole equation. And the second part really goes back into the credibility. How do we make sure that not just the users, consumers via EPR and via mandatory minimum recycled content targets are being encouraged to invest, including investing into the premiums that then will drive the investments, but also the chemical producers actually. There are lots of discussions how to do this in an efficient way. But if we are going to mandate also certain minimum targets for chemical producers that are ramping up as the technologies advance, this will help all of us to really take the responsibility that's needed to turn this around.
Ignacio, if I may.
Yep, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I very much agree with what Sandra said about recycled content, because this is key. We don't want to have any greenwashing and claiming, you know, like we start seeing a lot of bottles with 100% recycled content. I doubt that's the actual recycled content. So we would like to avoid that. So it really, we should not, you know, mislead consumers. And secondly, I think it's also very important to make a distinction between what we call chemical recycling and chemical recovery. And the distinction we make is on the basis of the actual conversion of carbon, but also the climate impacts. So meaning that the very, very energy intensive technologies should not be at the same level with other technologies, which have a much higher recycling rates and are also lower carbon. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That was a good good discussion. So now, hearing all of you, given the fact that there is momentum behind chemical recycling, alignment. How do we align the current players on chemical recycling, and what opportunities you see? And I'm talking about investors, petrochemicals, chemicals, consumer goods companies, the public, the legislator in the case of the EU with certain legislation being developed. How do you see all of this universe coming together? I think you're muted, Colin.
Oh, there we are. That's me. Sorry.
Now we hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Yes, good. Very good. So yes, maybe just to give a first perspective on that. I think, as you say, there is a lot of momentum overall, perhaps in this space, but I think it is a bit disjointed still. So there is quite a lot of momentum in the space of technology developers, technology providers, looking at how to develop their first generation of potential solutions in this space, with all of the challenges, of course, that come with new technology development, and certainly the challenges around not yet optimal conversion processes, questions around yield, and all the things that have been touched on. But nonetheless, there is certainly a lot of momentum in that space, and you see many people looking to develop and continue to develop solutions. I think you hear, on the other hand, and maybe the opposite end of the spectrum, I think it is fair to say that certainly the potential end users of the materials coming out of this sort of process do have a strong desire to find the right applications of these materials as part of the suite of solutions that we've talked about previously. And so, there are signals in the marketplace about the desire of brand owners and the type of potential opportunities that they would see to be able to plug gaps which are currently not possible for them to be able to use recycled materials in certain product forms. But I think that it's disjointed because a bit in the middle, which is the petrochemical players who have a critical role to play as part of a joined up process all the way through here, are still very much in the space of significant investments required in order to be able to bring the scale that's required in order to get this beyond sort of many demo plants and very small pilot plant operations that are being developed, where there is funding available, and in many cases people are accessing funds to develop those first levels. But to take those beyond into commercial scale operations, industrial scale operations that give them the right volume and capacity to be able to meet end needs, is still very much a developing space. Yeah, and I think that is a territory where there is a need for more connected and joined up approaches, both in terms of sources of investments and certainly in terms of commitments to be able to develop this technology. Because it's only when you get to that larger scale that indeed all of these questions around how to further optimize the yields and the processes and so on will of course be properly assessed. And indeed they will continue to improve over time, as is always the case with technology development. None of it stands still. But I think the need for everybody to come together in terms of making sure the right criteria, which is the importance of these principles that we've all been talking about today, getting to a point where everyone has a common set of principles, that the regulatory environment is positively supporting in the right manner the ability for people to have confidence to put the investments in, because this is a space where we can all talk about it, but until the investments are in place, it remains a twinkle in everybody's eye, frankly. And so it is important that eventually we are able to join up everybody along the value chain to make sure that what does emerge in the end is something that we're all comfortable with in terms of its proposition, but that those investments in particular are being unlocked. Because I think until that point we have this sort of mixed situation. And I think that's a key thing in order that momentum runs across the place and actually it takes us to the next level.
Thank you, Colin. Any other reaction from the panel on this momentum and the stakeholders implicated?
I mean, I think in terms of driving that alignment, the publication that the CGF group has done, that Zero Waste Europe is doing, that WWF has done in the past, is like all these principles documents I think are really helpful. Even if not all of three might be 100% aligned, they do help to get the right discussions on the table and to make sure we can work it out. I think other processes which are arguably a bit slow and take time, but are, for example, the ISO process that's going on developing an ISO standard on mass balance. Hopefully that can really help create a solid and credible set of boundary conditions and guidance for mass balance. And then finally, I think one thing that is probably counterproductive in this debate is I guess both narrative and behavior that suggests chemical recycling as a silver bullet solution. I think that works almost counterproductive, and it comes across as very non-credible because it is simply not a silver bullet solution. But you still see too many actors and players talk about this as if this is the one thing that will solve this problem, or if they not talk about it, it's sometimes in their behavior, right? I think there's a lot of other things and actions that we can take, being it on reuse, being it on design for recycling, on many different areas that don't depend on answering these difficult questions on chemical recycling, that we can start doing today. But not doing them only reinforces the impression that too many people are somehow counting on chemical recycling to suddenly solve it all. So I guess also delivering on the other parts of the solutions will really be helpful to show that yes, we're working on chemical recycling, but not as a silver bullet, because here's all the other things that we're doing in the meantime as well. I think that will be helpful for driving this agenda as well.
Yeah, maybe just
Yep. Go ahead.
Just maybe add. I very much agree with Sander, particularly on the last point. I think it's very challenging, the discussion, because it's very technical. I think when it comes to, for example, civil society, very few are active on that topic. which I don't know if we we can do much about it. We are trying to do our best, and that's why we created the principles paper. I think there is a need for more dialogue, and I think it's great to have this dialogue, for example, with industry and civil society now. I think there is a lot of clarity needed by the European Commission, and so hopefully waste framework directive review, which we already know that will not include any big changes and probably not include any definitions of chemical recycling now, but this is very much needed because there's a lot of confusion on that, and I think the last review was made with the mind of mechanical recycling. So I think some policy changes are needed in order to bring more clarity, and this is something that we have been advocating for from maybe from the perspective of industry. I think I would again call for more transparency in terms of life cycle assessments. I think we often, as Sander said, we see claims of having extremely good results when it comes to the climate impact or yields from some of the processes, and in reality what we have seen is that they are really maybe taken too far in terms of what the processes can do. So I think it's also important to be more transparent and really make the data available. So yeah, I think maybe some of the things that we can do.
Good.
Let me add one point maybe, and I appreciate the point. It's not a silver bullet, and I think it cannot be. And we had a comment in the question earlier, which was it needs to be complementary because we have such a huge challenge ahead of us. So if you think about the first mover coalition that was just announced at Davos, or not, it was already existing before, but who is putting a huge amount of money there to create the pull. And I think that's also how we need to look at chemical recycling. It's a technology that's in the infancy stage. The yield questions, the emissions reduction will all continue improving. So we also need to have a bit of a face of this is one solution, complementary to all the others based on the principles we discussed earlier today. But I really think we need to lean forward into driving innovation across the value chain as it was discussed, and the transparency that Yannick mentioned is really key here so that we really can iron out these differences in thinking and come to the best possible solution.
Good. Excellent. I'm looking at the time. We have 2 minutes, so I think we should, for those of you who had asked questions, we'll try to respond via email as well. But overall, I think, it's been a very good hour. I think chemical recycling remains a very important mean to fight leakage of plastic waste into the environment. It has an overall lower carbon footprint from what we've seen compared to today's end-of-life practices, incineration or landfilling. We're excited obviously about the prospects around chemical recycling and the industry scaling up, obviously within the principles that are being defined. Today, I think it's just 15% of EU collected plastic waste finds its way back into the market. So chemical recycling can definitely treat waste that can be recycled mechanically today. We want to help solve any open questions in this topic with regards to technology, to the economics, regulation, and we want to closely engage with the relevant stakeholders to tackle these challenges. And we really hope that this webinar has helped everyone today with this topic. So thank you so much to all of the speakers, first of all, to the support team at CGF and the systemic team as well, and to the 100+ people that have been listening in the audience. Thank you very much to everyone, and a very good day to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.